There's always been a limited amount of space on my desk, or should I say under my desk, because I like to use a full-size keyboard and mouse on the rollout platform, despite the fact that nobody uses it anymore, simply because it's more ergonomic and helps with posture and whatnot. Now, on that note, I was interested to see if there were any other mice that were more ergonomic and space-saving, since I do have such a cramped space, besides the traditional one, and that's where I came across the Elecom M-XT3. It's a trackball mouse, sort of similar to what you're familiar with the trackpad, except this time it integrates a ball to move your thumb around. If you're watching this video for the review, you probably know what a trackball is, and you're just here to see what I have to say about it. Well, this is sort of my first time using a trackball full time. I've used one before, but I've never really extensively used one on my own setup. So this is going to be kind of a hybrid between a review of the mouse. I'm going to try and stay objective towards the mouse, but it's also going to be touching a little bit more on my experience with the trackball. So just as a quick aside too, I must note that I do have really small hands. Well, at least I consider my hands small. So a lot of the gripes that I'm going to go on about is probably because of the fact that my hands are smaller, but your mileage may vary. So let's start with those gripes, shall we? The trackball I find just sticks out too far. I've been told that this is one of the models that it tends to stick out a lot, and something like the Logitech MX Ergo tends to be half as far sticking out, and that's something I find it annoying. If I'm doing fine movements, I really have to extend my thumb out, and it's just kind of fatiguing after a while for me to just keep having to reach my thumb out. And you could argue, well, you've never really done this motion before or whatnot, but it's just this particular trackball I find really sticks out far from the rest of my hand, and you'll probably see it in the images right here. And as you may have noticed looking at the trackball, it's red in color because if you look on Amazon or anywhere, it's a silver ball. Yeah, that's not the original ball. I have the original ball. It's a speckled, shiny gloss sort of thing, and it's nice. It's a little bit lighter than the ball I put in. That is a aftermarket ball you can get. I'll have a link in the description for that. This is because I found that the ball that it comes with is a little bit inaccurate. It's not too inaccurate, it's alright if you have it, but it's just not quite as precise as the other one. The stock one is just faster, but it's nowhere near as controlled. It seems to slip and slop when it sort of feels, and I found that I was getting, it could just be a novice thing, but I found that with that ball, the stock one, it would click and drag more often. So like if you go to click, sometimes there'd still be a little like jerk or motion there, and it would click and drag rather than just clicking. And maybe if you're a professional with a trackball, you might not experience that, but I found it was just generally a little more inaccurate. The cursor would just sort of move here and there. Now, as the design as a whole is just kind of too large in my opinion. Again, that's probably because of my smaller hands, but on the G502, the Logitech G502, I found that my ring and pinky finger like to grab closer. Yours probably not the same, but they sit really comfortably along the side. There's no drag or anything. And when I take my hand off of this mouse, it feels sort of like they were stretching. And you could say, okay, well, what about your thumb? It's obviously moving a lot more. You might not be used to the movement of the thumb ball, which is true, yes. My thumb was being exercised more. It sounds pathetic, but my thumb was being exercised more than, I'm used to with a mouse. So yeah, there was a little bit of strain there, but I'm talking about when I take my hand off, it feels like I've been sort of stretching them horizontally. And the other thing I wanted to note is on the FUNC. FUNC doesn't exist anymore. I don't know what they're called anymore. I have a FUNC mouse here that I'll show, and I don't mind using that mouse. I used it for several years, and it's about the same size. It's just that they did the notches exceptionally well, so that even if you have really large hands or really small hands, they'll fit nicely into the notches and don't have to sort of spread over the entirety of the shape. And while we're talking about things that are too large, the right and the mouse buttons are just plain too large. I don't care how big or small your hands are, the design is needless. You look at the top of this mouse right here, and you'll see that the left mouse button is just needlessly goes out. Your finger will never touch there. It just adds more room for mass to be resting on that tiny little switch. Which, speaking of those switches, are actually quite lightweight and flaky feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but I'm gonna stop talking here for just a second and click rapidly between the G502 and this mouse, and I don't know if you'll hear it, but the G502 has a much more crisp and just a real, I don't know how to describe it, sort of a punch to it. You just click it and it's like, oh yes, I'm clicking a mouse. But with this one, it just sort of feels flaky, like, yeah, it's probably gonna last a long time. It's probably even made by the same company, but it just isn't as nice of a switch to press. And I'll stop talking here. Let me just zoom in and get you better. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and start clicking on this one first, the Elecom. Now the Logitech. With your fingers resting on the left and right mouse buttons, you're probably noticing that they're in sort of like a trough. And I get why they did that. It's just so that your fingers are in a nice position so that they're going to stay comfortable for a long period of time, which isn't bad, except for the fact that the verticality between the slope is so steep and high. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it actually is so much that it's quite fatiguing to reach the forward and back buttons and the scroll wheel itself. So let's say that I want to use one of those forward and back buttons. I go ahead and lift my index finger up, and I move it over to press them, which would be a fine action. That's not a big deal to really lift it up and move, but I also have to move my middle finger over as well. And doing so on a regular mouse, you just sort of shift it slightly, like 1.5 millimeters, and it's fine. But with this, moving 1.5 millimeters means you also have to climb it up a skateboard park of an incline so that it's almost touching the scroll wheel so that you can reach the other one. Now, this is probably another small hand problem, but you see what I mean. If you have hands that require you to touch the other buttons at all, you have to move the entire thing up the slope of an incline. That doesn't even touch the fact that the scroll wheel itself also requires you to do the same motion, whether it's either finger. You have to move it all the way up this giant incline, like I'm gonna do a jump, and then start moving the scroll wheel. And speaking of the scroll wheel, I really miss the Logitech flying scroll wheel. The G502 doesn't have it quite as well as the MX Master. The MX Master, you can set what point it releases when you flick at it. But with the 502, at least it's there. You can click it, and it just goes whoosh, and it flies off, and you can scroll through 1,000 pages. And the scroll wheel on this is just crap. It just feels like it's going to break by comparison. I can already tell that those notches in the rotary encoder are just going to fail, and you're going to start skipping jumps or going up, down, and all over the place, and it's going to fail. I know it will. It's awful and just generally not as responsive as the Logitech scroll wheel, or a lot of Logitech scroll wheels. And I believe even the MX Ergo doesn't have this scroll wheel, which is really disappointing that the trackball community is just being left out on this sort of scrolling functionality, because that is such a nice scroll that Logitech has come up with, and their own brand doesn't even have it. Either way, that's a bit of a rant, I won't go there. Now, the software does come up with a solution to this. They call it the flying scroll wheel as well, but it's not as nice. Basically, you set the number of rotations that you want to activate flying scroll. So if you rotate similar to a double click a certain number of times in a certain amount of time, it'll start automatically scrolling down as if you pressed in on the middle click and moved the mouse. But it's kind of not controllable and just sort of goes at a fixed speed. It's kind of unresponsive. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And it's just not the same as that physical whoosh, and it flies off and you stop it when you want and it relocks. It's not the same as the real thing. But I think I'm going to stop ranting now. Let's start to move into the pros of this trackball that I really liked. I liked the function button. Not a lot of trackballs have the function button. I know some of them do, but this one has a function button, and it's really nice to have that extra button that you can do gesture controls. At least they claim gesture controls can be done, so you can do up, down, left, right. You hold the button down, you do up, right, down, left, right, whatever gestures you want, and it'll automatically do something. That something for me is nothing. I could not get this to work. I tried everything. I tried minimizing, I tried bringing up apps, I tried bringing up the control panel, I tried every single function you can possibly do. I cannot get it to work. Even the simplest of movements, I thought maybe the movement is too long. Make the movement shorter, can't do it. I can't not make these functions to work. If someone could explain to me in the comments what I'm doing wrong, that would be great. Moving on though, arbitrary keys also work as well. So if you just want to do something like Control W or Control Shift T to bring back a tab or whatever function you want to do in Excel, it'll do it. You can set it up and then you press that button and it does that function. And one of the interesting things is it actually does profiling. Now, I know it doesn't seem like a lot because a lot of other software apps do this, but this software is such a piece of crap that I am really surprised that it's able to do this. You set up which piece of software you're currently focused on. Let's say it's a browser like Firefox, and I can set up a specific profile that only activates on, let's say, Firefox and Edge or Chrome. And when I'm on a browser, Because I set them up as those applications that it recognizes, it'll automatically switch to that profile and have those specific keys swapped over. You can swap over every single key if you want, and it'll specifically know, oh, I'm focused on Excel, or I'm focused on Firefox, and it'll be like, this is now the profile for the mouse. You can left click and right click or swapped or something, and it just knows, and I was impressed by that. The thing is, you have to switch it back to default so that it'll automatically change. I found that was a weird bug. I don't know, maybe yours won't do that for some reason, but for me, I had to switch it back to default, and then whenever I would change apps, it would know. But if you don't set it to default initially after you finish configuring, it won't know to switch. It'll just stay on one of them. Now the DPI, if you were thinking of configuring the DPI in the software, you can't. It's literally just 750, 1500. That's it. So if you have a really big 4K screen and you want more DPI, you're out of luck. You just can't. It is only 750, 1500. I don't mind having 2 physical switches. Like, I don't know, maybe I'll have a choice of 2. I don't really mind that, but let me customize them in the software. I need to be able to make one maybe 250 and one 600. But at the same time, that's also a plus in a bad way, because the software is crap. And I know that if they had done it, it wouldn't have been great. The software is okay, but it's buggy at times, like I said, with the default profiles. And sometimes if you enter an arbitrary key and you press enter the wrong way, or you look at it funny, it doesn't configure it properly and you gotta reinstall the whole app. And you can't escape the software either. The mouse doesn't store any of your settings, the software does. And I don't expect the mouse to store any of my profiles for apps or whatever, but at least the default configuration should be stored on the mouse, so that if I just change devices, I don't have to transfer the settings every single time. Wait a second, this is supposed to be the positive section. Even though I keep talking about how this mouse is too large for me, it actually does have a small footprint relative to all the other trackballs I've seen. You can take it with you pretty much anywhere you want. If you're using your laptop on the bus or whatever, you can just throw this mouse on your lap and just use your laptop, or even just put it on the corner of your laptop if your laptop's large enough, and just use it. It's oftentimes better than the trackpad you have built in, and it's got more functionality. You can put it on pretty much anywhere. If it fits in that space, you can just use it there. You don't have to worry about moving the mouse. Oh, I need more room. Gotta move everything off the desk for this mouse space. You just put it down, it's ready to go. I keep harping about how it's too large for my hands, which is true, but it really doesn't take that much space up when you actually put it down on some sort of surface. And on top of that, this particular model is wireless, so you can put it wherever you want. I haven't really tested the range because I need to see the screen, and people are saying that it lasts about a year off a single charge. I can't confirm that because I haven't had it for a year, but I'm guessing that it's probably going to last you a few months, because it also has an auto on and off feature that should put it into standby mode when not in use. That's what they claim. I actually can't verify this though, because there are no indicator lights on this. When you turn it on, there's a small red LED that blinks down in the scroll wheel when you first turn it on. But that's about it. There's also a low power mode, which they claim is less accurate at high speeds, but it doesn't seem much different to me. And speaking of high speeds, this thumball is actually quite speedy, especially around an ultra-wide monitor or something with a higher resolution. It tracks quite well with an aftermarket ball, and you can really just throw the ball and it just flies across the screen when you need it and stop it when you need it. There's no sticking issues, it's accurate. However, this is more of a trackball in general issue. You have to clean the ball. And you're thinking, well, of course you have to clean the ball. But when you've come from a traditional mouse and you can just keep getting that thing filthier and filthier until it literally is only made out of finger oil and it still works, and then you come here and you use it for about 3 hours and it starts to gum up a little bit because you're disgusting and filthy, it's kind of a drag to have to clean it every once in a while. The finger oil just gets in and it's inevitable. It's just the design, the concept of a trackball. This isn't really necessarily negative to this particular mouse, even though this mouse has a lot of flaws. That's the problem with the thumball. And I don't really know why I'm mentioning it here. It's just sort of something to consider if you're watching this and you're a beginner like me who hasn't used the trackball a lot. So let's just finish this already. Would I recommend this trackball? I don't think so. It just hasn't been a great introduction to the concept as I would have liked. I can already tell what the benefits and advantages of a trackball are at its core, but it just isn't executed quite as nicely as I expected from this mouse. For $50, I guess I can't be too tough on it. In sheer portability, I would take it over most laptop trackpads. However, at home, I don't really experience much fatigue to begin with, but I do see how I would reduce repetitive strain. I just wish it had a little bit more tilt for my wrists, like the M-XT3DRBK does, and the thumball really does just stick out too far from my hands. So from a sheer feature point perspective, I think you should just save up the extra money and try to go for the M-XT3DRBK. It won't solve all of the issues that I've discussed before, like the scroll wheel for example, but it will solve a lot of the problems that I was describing. As for myself, I think I'm gonna have to stick to the traditional mouse for now, just because the form factor is so much nicer for my hands. Maybe we'll come back and revisit it at some point, but either way, I hope you found this somewhat useful, and I'll see you next time.